The day started like any other at the tall glass building that stood in the middle of the busy city. People walked through the lobby with quick steps, holding files, coffee cups, or phones pressed to their ears. Most of them barely looked up, too focused on getting to their floors. In the middle of all this movement, a man in a simple uniform quietly pushed a cleaning cart, his head slightly bent as he worked his way around the floor. He had done this job for years, long enough to know every corner of the building, every fingerprint on a railing, every smudge on a window. He didn't speak much, but those who paid attention knew he was gentle, polite, and always on time. On the other side of the lobby doors, a long black car rolled up to the entrance. Security rushed to straighten their jackets. Staff near the front desk exchanged looks and fixed their posture. Whenever that car arrived, the mood shifted. It meant the man who owned half the companies in the district was about to walk in. He didn't visit this particular branch often, so his surprise arrival always caused a little panic. The billionaire stepped out of the car with the ease of someone used to attention. His suit looked simple but clearly cost more than what most people made in a month. 2 executives walked with him, trying to match his pace and laughing at every small joke he made, even though the jokes were not all that funny. That was what usually happened when he was around. People tried too hard to impress him, or they stayed far away, afraid of saying the wrong thing. The moment he entered the lobby, people pretended not to notice, but their eyes followed him quietly. The billionaire liked these visits because they broke his routine. Instead of boardrooms and presentations, he got to walk around and see things for himself. Sometimes he joked with the staff, sometimes he asked sharp questions that left people sweating. No one knew what mood he would be in, and that made everyone nervous. That morning, however, he seemed relaxed. He walked around the lobby with his hands in his pockets, looking at the plants, the paintings, and the large piano placed near the windows. The piano was mostly for decoration. Every now and then a visitor would play a tune, but most days it sat untouched, looking pretty and quiet. When the billionaire reached the piano, he paused, brushed some dust off the keys, and pressed one of them lightly. A simple note rang out. He smiled, almost as if he had just remembered something funny. The 2 executives quickly stepped closer, hoping to laugh at a moment they didn't yet understand. He tapped another key, then another, making uneven sounds. Finally, he turned around slightly and joked, "Play this perfectly and I'll marry you." His voice echoed through the wide space. The executives laughed loudly, their laughter bouncing off the walls, eager to show they appreciated his humor. A few people walking through the lobby smiled awkwardly. No one took his words seriously. Everyone knew it was just one of his silly rich man jokes, the kind he made when he felt playful. But there was one person who did not laugh. The janitor, sweeping near the far side of the lobby, heard the comment clearly. He didn't react, didn't even look up. He simply continued wiping the floor, carefully moving the mop in slow strokes. His face stayed calm, but inside, something tightened. The sound of the piano keys, even played so poorly, stirred something in him that had been asleep for a long time. The billionaire didn't notice him. He never paid attention to the cleaning staff unless he needed something. He walked past the piano and continued his tour, chatting with his executives about small changes needed in the decor. They followed him dutifully, nodding at everything he said. As the group walked toward the elevators, a few people looked at the janitor with sympathy. They knew how tiring it could be to work hard while others joked loudly nearby. But the janitor wasn't bothered by that. He had seen much worse. He had lived through days far harder than this. He didn't mind being invisible most of the time. It gave him peace. Still, the billionaire's joke kept echoing in his mind. Not because of the words, but because of the piano sound. It felt like an old memory knocking at a door he had locked long ago. He tried to shake the thought away and refocus on his work. He reminded himself that he was only here to clean, nothing more. A few minutes later, the billionaire and his executives stepped into the elevator and disappeared upstairs. The lobby slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Phones rang, conversations continued, people rushed in and out. Only the distant reflection of the piano remained in the janitor's mind. He had always avoided going near it. Not because he disliked the piano, but because touching those keys brought back a life he no longer lived. A life that had ended before it had even begun properly. A life full of music, practice, competitions, dreams, and a future that once felt bright. But life does not always follow our plans. Sometimes it bends, sometimes it breaks, and sometimes it changes everything in one single moment. For now, he kept his eyes on his cleaning tasks. He tried to think about simple things, what time his shift ended, what groceries he needed to pick up later, whether the weather would stay clear. But the memory of that soft piano note kept returning. It felt like a quiet whisper reminding him of a part of himself he had tried to forget. The day moved forward slowly. People continued walking around him. Some nodded politely as he passed. Others walked by without noticing him at all. He didn't mind. He liked being the one who observed rather than the one being observed. He found comfort in the routine, the predictability, the quiet repetition. It was steady. It was safe. Yet, something about that moment earlier kept tugging at him gently. It wasn't the billionaire's joke. It wasn't the laughter. It was simply the sound of the piano. The way it echoed softly across the marble floor. The way the keys looked under the morning light. The way his hands almost moved on their own, as if remembering old habits. Hours later, he found himself unconsciously glancing at the piano every time he passed through the lobby. He caught himself doing it and looked away quickly, almost embarrassed, as if someone might read his thoughts. He took a deep breath and focused on his job again. But each time he looked up, the piano seemed to be waiting for him in the corner of his eye. No one else noticed this quiet internal struggle. People were busy with their own lives, their own stresses, their own goals. The billionaire was upstairs surrounded by reports and eager executives. The office workers were buried in tasks. Security guards were at their posts. It was an ordinary day for everyone, except one man who felt something inside him slowly waking up. As the afternoon sun shifted and shadows stretched across the lobby, the janitor paused for a moment, leaning on his cart. He told himself it was silly to even think about it. That chapter of his life was closed. He worked to survive now, not to dream. Dreams were expensive. Reality was not. But he also knew that music had never really left him. It had simply become quiet, tucked away behind daily responsibilities. And sometimes all it took was a single note, just one, to bring an entire world back into focus. He shook his head again and forced himself to move. He wasn't going to let imagination distract him. He had work to finish. The piano, the joke, the memory, none of it mattered. He repeated that in his mind, hoping it would settle the restless feeling inside. Yet deep down he sensed something. A small, almost invisible shift. As if the day had placed a tiny crack in the wall he had built around himself. A crack so thin no one else could see it. But he felt it. And through that crack, a faint light from his past was starting to slip through. He didn't know it yet, but this small moment, this tiny disturbance was going to change everything. And it had all started with one careless joke echoing across a busy lobby. The janitor finished the rest of his shift that day with his mind drifting in and out of memories he had tried hard to bury. He walked through hallways, wiped down glass doors, and emptied bins the same way he always did. But inside he felt unsettled, almost like a quiet storm was moving through him. Every time he tried to push the feeling away, something reminded him again. The soft echo of a piano key, the sunlight that glowed on the black surface of the instrument, or the billionaire's joke that seemed harmless to everyone except him. When he finally got home that evening, he placed his bag on the small wooden table near the door. His room was modest and simple. A single bed pushed against one wall, a narrow window, a fan that hummed at night, and a shelf with a few books he rarely had time to read. He changed into comfortable clothes and sat down, wanting to relax, but his mind kept wandering back to the same place. It had been years since he last touched a piano, but the sound of those keys earlier felt like they had reached inside him and tapped on something fragile. He closed his eyes for a moment and let out a slow breath. Memories came back to him, not in big waves, but in scattered images. Early mornings practicing scales, late nights rehearsing for a small performance, the way people once looked at him when he played as if he belonged on a stage. He remembered the old music teacher who used to say he had hands made for the piano, gentle yet strong, patient yet full of emotion. He remembered winning a small competition when he was young and thinking his whole life was going to be about music. But he also remembered the day everything changed. Not because he wanted to, but because certain memories never really leave, even when you wish they would. Life had placed heavy burdens on his family, responsibilities he never saw coming. He had been young, hopeful, maybe even naive. He thought he could balance it all. His passion, his family, his dreams. But life pushed too hard, too fast. Bills piled up, someone at home fell ill, and suddenly the world he had built around music shattered, leaving him no choice but to step away. At first, he told himself it was temporary, that he would come back to it when things settled. But weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. Eventually, he stopped telling himself anything at all. He simply worked wherever he could, taking jobs that paid enough to keep things together. He survived, but he did not live the life he once imagined. And somewhere along that path, he learned to silence the part of his heart that used to beat for music. He thought it was gone for good until today. He opened his eyes and looked around the quiet room. There was nothing here that showed who he used to be. Not a single photo, not a music sheet, not even a small keyboard. It was almost as if he had wiped away all evidence of the boy he once was. But the truth was, he could never completely forget. Not really. Music was the one thing he had loved without fear, without doubt, without hesitation. It wasn't just something he did. It was something he felt, something that lived inside him. That night, he struggled to sleep. He kept turning from one side to the other, trying to calm the restlessness in his chest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the piano again. The keys, the sunlight, the empty space where a player should be sitting. It felt like the past was calling to him softly, asking if he still remembered how to answer. The next morning, he arrived at work early. The building was still quiet, and the lobby lights had only just been switched on. He pushed his cleaning cart through the large glass doors and paused for a moment. There it was, the piano sitting exactly where it always did, silent and beautiful. He stood still, unsure why his feet refused to move. Maybe it was because no one else was around. Maybe it was because the lobby felt different at this hour, empty and peaceful, without the usual rush of footsteps and conversations. Or maybe it was because he knew deep inside that something needed to happen sooner or later. He forced himself to walk past it and get to work. He wiped the tables, cleaned the counters, polished the railings. He tried to keep his mind busy, but the piano was close enough that he could see it out of the corner of his eye. The more he ignored it, the heavier the feeling inside him grew. At one point he stopped and sat down on a bench, taking a moment to breathe. He told himself he didn't need to go near it. That part of his life was over. He shouldn't look back. But the truth was, avoiding it made him feel even more uncomfortable. Sometimes running from something didn't protect you, it trapped you. Later in the morning, people began to arrive and the lobby filled with noise again. He returned to his routine, working quietly between the moving crowd. But as he moved, he noticed something unusual. A young intern stood near the piano, pressing the keys at random, laughing with a friend. Their careless plinking sounded nothing like music, but it reminded him again how easily people touched something he once treated like treasure. The sound made him turn his head. Not fully, not deliberately, but just enough for the intern to notice. "You know how to play?" the intern asked casually. The janitor shook his head gently. "Long time ago," he said softly. The intern smiled politely and went back to chatting with his friend. It was a simple moment, unimportant to them, but it left a mark on him. Someone had seen a piece of him he had tried to hide for so long. As the day went on, he kept moving from floor to floor, carrying his supplies, following the patterns of his job. But inside, a new kind of tension grew. Not fear, not sadness, something else, like a door slowly opening somewhere deep in his chest. During his lunch break, he sat alone on a small chair in the back room and ate quietly. But he barely tasted his food. His thoughts kept drifting. He imagined himself sitting at the piano again after all these years. He wondered what his fingers would feel like on the keys. Would they remember? Would he stumble? Would the music still be there, hiding in some corner of his memory? Or had it disappeared completely? He wasn't sure, and the uncertainty scared him more than anything. The idea that he might have lost the only thing he once believed made him special. That thought hit deeper than he expected. When his break ended, he stood up slowly and went back to work. The day passed, but the heaviness inside him stayed. Even when he tried to focus, the music of his past kept pulling at him gently, like an invisible thread wrapped around his heart. That evening, the billionaire returned to the lobby again, surrounded by a few people from the upper floors. He was in a different mood this time, more serious, thinking about meetings, numbers, and deadlines. He didn't notice the janitor passing by, and the janitor didn't expect him to. Their worlds barely touched. But something else happened. When the billionaire walked past the piano, he glanced at it and said with a small smile, "Someone should learn to play that thing. It's too beautiful to just sit there." The executives laughed politely, agreeing with him as they always did. But the janitor, who was walking a few steps behind, heard every word. It wasn't a joke this time. It wasn't said loudly or carelessly. It was almost a thoughtful comment, something the billionaire said without realizing its weight. And somehow, those words touched the janitor more deeply than the joke from the day before. After the billionaire left, the janitor found himself standing still, staring at the piano again. The soft lights of the lobby made the instrument look warm, inviting. He felt something inside shift, something almost like a quiet courage he hadn't felt in years. He didn't touch the piano that day. He didn't even walk closer to it. But for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to think about the possibility. Not a dream, not a fantasy, just a simple possibility. Maybe he wasn't as far from music as he thought. Maybe it was still there, waiting for him. And maybe, just maybe, life was sending him a sign, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. The thought stayed with him long after he left the building that night. It followed him home, into his small room, into his sleep. And without knowing it, he was slowly stepping toward a moment that would change everything. Not with force, but with quiet steps, shaped by memories, courage, and the sound of a single note that refused to fade. The janitor arrived at work the next morning with mixed feelings he could not name. His steps were slow, almost hesitant, as if he was walking toward something he wasn't sure he wanted to confront. The building's lobby was still quiet, the lights soft, the floors freshly polished. And there it was again, the piano, silent, still, waiting. He paused for a moment, just long enough to take a breath, before pushing his cart forward and continuing his routine. But today, something inside him felt different. He didn't rush through his tasks the way he usually did. He moved slowly, thoughtfully, almost as if he was giving himself time to think. Every now and then, he allowed his eyes to drift toward the piano, and every time he did, his heart reacted in a way he couldn't ignore. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable, to feel so drawn to something he had abandoned years ago. He wondered if it was foolish to even think about touching those keys again. He wondered if he still had the right to call himself someone who once loved music. But he also knew that pretending he didn't care wasn't working anymore. The more he tried to hide from it, the more it followed him. He took a slow breath and forced himself to focus on his job. He cleaned the glass doors, wiped the tables in the waiting area, and carried supplies to the upper floors. He tried to engage with the little moments of everyday life. People greeting him politely, the receptionist offering him a cup of water, the security guard chatting with him briefly. These simple interactions usually kept his mind steady. But today they felt distant. His thoughts kept circling the same place like a bird searching for somewhere to land. In the late morning, when the lobby became busier, he moved to the side hallway to mop the floors. While he worked, he overheard two employees talking near the elevator. "I heard the boss wants someone to play a piece during the next company event," one of them said. "He mentioned it yesterday." "Seriously? Who's going to play? No one here even knows how." He joked that if someone could play it well, he'd be so surprised he might hand out bonuses. They laughed and walked away, but the janitor stood frozen, his hands gripping the mop handle a little too tightly. The same joke, the same piano, the same reminder that life had once offered him something beautiful. He closed his eyes for a second, letting the sound of their footsteps fade. Even if it was just another joke to them, he couldn't shake the way it echoed inside him. When he returned to the lobby later, he noticed the billionaire standing near the piano again. The man wasn't laughing this time. He simply touched the edge of the instrument with a thoughtful expression, as if the piano reminded him of something too. For a moment, the janitor wondered if the billionaire had a personal connection to the instrument. Maybe he used to play. Maybe he once dreamed of it. Sometimes people with the most power carried quiet stories too. Stories no one ever heard because the world only paid attention to their success. As the janitor walked past, the billionaire looked up briefly and nodded at him. It was a small gesture, almost insignificant, but somehow it felt meaningful. It was rare for people in higher positions to acknowledge workers like him. He didn't expect anything more than that nod, and he didn't need to. But something about it made the air feel slightly different. The billionaire said something to his assistant and walked off with his group, leaving the piano alone again. The janitor stood near his cart for a moment, staring at the instrument. He wasn't sure why today felt heavier than the others. Maybe it was because everything around him seemed to be pushing him in the same direction, even if gently. Maybe it was because he was tired of pretending he didn't care. He finished his shift later than usual. The building was empty by the time he returned to the lobby to put away his mop and bucket. The quiet felt deeper at night, almost like the building itself was asleep. He looked at the piano again. For a moment, he thought about walking straight past it, just as he had every other day. But then he stopped. Something inside him whispered that if he didn't face this now, he might never do it. His hands felt slightly shaky as he walked toward the piano. The closer he got, the louder his heartbeat seemed to sound in his ears. He hadn't touched a piano in years. What if everything he remembered was gone? What if the moment he pressed a key, he realized there was nothing left inside him? The thought scared him more than anything. He stood beside the piano and took a slow breath. His fingers hovered above the keys but didn't touch them. The fear was stronger than he expected. Not fear of failure, but fear of discovering he no longer belonged to the world he once loved. He closed his eyes. He waited. And then, softly, he lowered his hand and pressed a single key. The note was gentle, delicate, and bright, filling the empty lobby with a sound that felt too familiar. It was like hearing a voice he hadn't heard in years, warm, honest, comforting. His breath caught for a moment. The sound stirred something deep inside him, something fragile but alive. He pressed another key, then another. Each note felt like a memory waking up. His hands trembled, but not from fear anymore, from recognition. He sat down slowly on the piano bench. He didn't force himself to play a full song. Instead, he allowed his fingers to move lightly over the keys, searching, remembering, relearning. His hands were stiff at first. His movements were hesitant. But little by little, the stiffness faded. His fingers began to recall patterns, shapes, rhythms he thought he had lost forever. The music that came out was not perfect. It wasn't polished or powerful. But it was real, honest, gentle. It carried the weight of years and the softness of quiet resilience. It sounded like someone finding a part of himself again. He kept playing softly, barely above a whisper, lost in the moment. He didn't even notice the security guard standing near the entrance, watching with quiet surprise. The guard didn't interrupt. He simply listened for a few seconds before turning away, choosing to keep the moment private. The janitor played until he felt something shift inside him, a mix of relief and sadness and hope all at once. When he finally stopped, the silence that followed felt warm instead of empty. He sat there for a few seconds longer, his hands resting gently on the keys. He wasn't sure whether to smile or cry. Maybe he didn't need to choose. What he felt was too deep to be just one emotion. It was like rediscovering a part of himself he thought he had buried forever. He stood up slowly, taking one last look at the piano. For the first time in years, he didn't feel afraid of it. He felt connected to it, like it was something familiar, something he understood. He returned to his small room that night with a quiet calm he hadn't felt in a long time. He sat on his bed, closed his eyes, and let the memory of the piano keys linger in his mind. It didn't matter that he had played softly. It didn't matter that no one had heard him. What mattered was that he had taken the first step. The next morning, when he walked into the building again, he felt different. Not confident, not bold, but open, as if the door inside him that had been locked for so many years was now slightly ajar. He greeted the receptionist, nodded to the security guard, and pushed his cart toward the lobby. When he saw the piano, he didn't look away. He didn't rush past it. He acknowledged it with a quiet glance, almost like greeting an old friend. He knew he was not ready yet to play openly. He knew the world would not change in a day. But he also knew something important had started. Something that might lead him to a moment greater than he ever expected. Something that might bring him face to face with the billionaire again. Something that might change both of their lives, even if neither of them could see it yet. For now, he carried that quiet hope with him, tucked safely in his chest, waiting for its time to grow. The next few days moved in a way that felt both ordinary and different at the same time. Nothing dramatic happened on the outside, no big scenes, no sudden events. People came to work, elevators opened and closed, the lobby filled with the same footsteps and voices. But inside the janitor, something had shifted so deeply that even the simplest tasks felt new. He still swept the floors, wiped the glass and emptied bins, but each time he passed the piano, he felt a quiet pull, like a small thread tying him to it. He didn't go near it again, not yet, but he no longer avoided looking at it. Now when he walked by, his eyes lingered for a second, remembering how the keys felt under his fingers that night when he had played alone. That moment had left an imprint on him, and even though he tried to keep his emotions steady, he felt something inside him slowly waking. On the third morning after his late night playing, the building was buzzing more than usual. A meeting had been called by the billionaire, and word traveled quickly among the employees. People rushed around adjusting their ties, fixing their hair, or reviewing notes, even if they weren't part of the meeting. Whenever the billionaire held gatherings, everyone felt the need to be at their best. The janitor wasn't involved in any of it, of course, but he felt the tension in the air as he worked. He watched people hurry past, whispering about what the billionaire might want this time. Some said he was planning a new company event. Others said he was bringing in a partner from another country. No one knew for certain. He continued sweeping near the lobby entrance, moving slowly to stay out of everyone's way. The elevators opened, and the billionaire stepped out with a few executives trailing behind him. He looked more energetic than he had in the past few visits, talking quickly, gesturing with his hands, and walking with purpose. As he approached the piano, he paused again. Not long. Not as if he intended to stop. It was more like the piano caught his eye for a brief moment. He tapped the edge of it with his finger, then looked at his executives and said with a small laugh, "Still waiting for someone brave enough to make this thing useful." They all chuckled politely, even though none of them planned to touch it. It wasn't unusual for expensive decorations to remain untouched in buildings like this. Most people were afraid of damaging something valuable. The janitor heard the billionaire's words, and though it was said lightly, it stuck with him. Brave enough. It was a simple phrase, but it stayed in his mind like a gentle reminder that sometimes fear disguised itself as silence. Later that afternoon, after the meeting ended, the billionaire returned to the lobby alone. The executives had gone back to their offices, and the building had quieted a little. He walked around slowly, as if his mind was still processing the information from the meeting. His steps eventually led him back to the piano. He stood in front of it, staring at the keys without touching them. He seemed deep in thought, almost reflective. The janitor, sweeping not far from him, noticed the unusual stillness. Something about the billionaire's posture made him wonder what thoughts were hidden behind that polished exterior. The billionaire glanced over and found the janitor nearby. For a moment, their eyes met. It was a brief connection, nothing dramatic. But something shifted in the billionaire's expression, softening just a little, curious in a way that didn't feel distant or superior. "You're here early every day," the billionaire said. His voice wasn't commanding this time. It was calm, almost conversational. "Yes, sir," the janitor replied softly. I start before the lobby gets busy. The billionaire nodded slowly. I've seen you around. You work quietly. The janitor didn't know how to respond to that, so he just gave a polite smile. Silence filled the space between them for a moment, not uncomfortable, but strange for both. Then, almost unexpectedly, the billionaire asked, "Do you know anything about this piano?" The janitor blinked. The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean, sir?" The billionaire brushed his fingers over the lid, not quite opening it. "I mean, does anyone ever play it? Or is it just decoration?" The janitor hesitated, unsure how much he should say. He didn't want to admit that he had played it recently when no one was around. But he also felt something honest rising in him, something he didn't want to hide. "I think," he said quietly, "most people are too afraid to try." The billionaire let out a soft laugh. "Maybe. Or maybe they just don't know how." The janitor said nothing, and for a few seconds, the billionaire simply looked at the piano, as if waiting for someone to answer a question he hadn't said aloud. Then he walked away without another word. The janitor watched him disappear into the hallway, unsure what to make of the interaction. Part of him felt nervous, wondering if he had said too much. But another part of him felt strangely lighter, as if a door had opened, not wide, but wide enough to let some air in. That evening, as the building emptied out, the janitor did his usual rounds. The lobby grew quiet again, the way it always did when the day settled. He pushed his cart past the piano several times, each time feeling the same gentle pull. He resisted the urge to sit down and play again. He told himself he shouldn't make it a habit. But the music inside him felt stronger now, like it was pushing against the walls he had built. A few hours later, when he finished his cleaning tasks, he paused near the piano once more. This time he didn't sit or touch it. He simply looked at it and took a deep breath. He knew something was getting closer, some moment he couldn't fully see yet. He didn't know what form it would take, or how it would affect his life, but he felt the tension building like a quiet wave rising steadily. The next morning arrived with a surprising change. A small sign had been placed on the piano. Not a warning sign, not a do not touch message, just a simple note that said, "If you can play, please do." The janitor stared at it longer than he meant to. Someone had chosen those words. Someone wanted music in this space. Someone believed the piano shouldn't sit silent forever. He wondered who placed the note. A receptionist? A manager? The billionaire himself? He didn't ask. But the message stayed with him, lingering in his thoughts as he worked. The idea felt bold. Too bold. And yet he couldn't stop thinking about it. During lunch, he sat alone again. But this time he wasn't restless with confusion. He was restless with possibility. He imagined the lobby filled with sound. Not loud, not showy, just gentle music filling the empty space. He imagined people pausing, listening, maybe even smiling. He imagined a moment that could change everything. But then fear rushed back in. What if he embarrassed himself? What if he made mistakes? What if someone judged him? What if the billionaire walked in at the wrong moment? He shook his head and tried to calm himself. But deep inside, he knew something. Life had brought him back to this place for a reason. He didn't know what the reason was, but he felt it with a certainty he couldn't explain. Late that evening, as the building grew quiet once again, he approached the piano slowly. His hands were trembling, but his heart felt steady. He sat down gently, almost afraid the bench would reject him. For a long time he didn't touch the keys. He just sat there, breathing, feeling, waiting. Then he placed both hands on the keyboard, and instead of playing softly like before, he began to play with intention. The notes were still gentle, but now they were fuller, clearer, shaped by emotion instead of fear. His fingers moved with memory and longing, telling a story he had held inside for years. The lobby filled with a warmth that felt almost unreal. It wasn't loud, but it was powerful in its own quiet way. What he didn't know was that the billionaire had returned to the building for a forgotten file. As he walked through a side hallway, the sound of the piano reached him like a whisper that demanded attention. He stopped walking. His expression changed, and he followed the music. He approached the lobby slowly, each step filled with surprise and disbelief. When he saw who was playing, he didn't laugh. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply watched, stunned. The janitor didn't notice him yet. He was lost in the music, lost in the memory of who he once was. And in that moment, the billionaire saw something he had never expected to see. A genius hidden in plain sight. The lobby felt different the next morning, almost as if the air itself carried a softer warmth. People walked through the building with the usual rush, but something about their expressions showed a quiet excitement. They kept glancing toward the piano, almost expecting someone to sit down and play again. Word had spread quickly about what happened the previous day, and the moment the billionaire arrived, whispers began to follow him like shadows. He didn't seem bothered by the attention. Instead, he walked with a calm expression, as if he had been thinking deeply all night. His eyes searched the lobby until they landed on the janitor, who was placing new trash bags into a bin. The billionaire walked over slowly, not with the commanding stride he usually used, but with a gentler pace. When the janitor looked up, he seemed unsure whether to smile or step back. He still felt a bit embarrassed that so many people had found out about his hidden talent. He had always tried to stay invisible, not because he lacked confidence, but because life had taught him to stay quiet and not expect too much. The billionaire gave him a small smile. "I've been thinking about you all night," he said. "About your music, about your story, and honestly, about how much I misjudged you." The janitor didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded and continued to listen. "I want to offer you something," the billionaire said. "Something better than cleaning floors or staying behind the scenes." He paused for a moment, watching the man's expression. "I want to start a community music program, a place where people who can't afford instruments or lessons can learn. I want you to run it." The janitor froze. For a moment his breath seemed to stop. He couldn't imagine himself in such a role, not after everything he had lost over the years. "Me?" he whispered. "Yes," the billionaire replied, sounding certain. "You. No one else could guide those kids the way you could. You know what it means to lose something you love. That makes you the perfect person to help others hold on to their dreams." The janitor looked down, trying to blink away the emotion gathering in his eyes. He wasn't used to people seeing him as someone valuable. For years he had done his job quietly, receiving nods but never respect. Now someone was offering him the chance to step back into the life he once had to abandon. I don't know if I'm the right person," he admitted softly. "It's been a long time since I touched that world." The billionaire shook his head gently. "Yesterday proved everything. Your talent never left you. It was only waiting for you to find it again." The janitor's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. He finally nodded. "If you think I can do it, I'll try." The billionaire's face lit up. Then it settled. From that day forward, life began to change rapidly. Meetings were scheduled, a building was chosen for renovation, and dozens of people worked together to bring the new program to life. They chose warm colors for the walls, comfortable seating, and a space where anyone, child or adult, could pick up an instrument without feeling judged. The janitor, now stepping into his new role, spent his evenings practicing. His fingers regained their strength, and soon he played with the same passion he once had in his youth. Every note reminded him of who he used to be and who he was becoming again. When the community program finally opened, the event drew a large crowd. Families, students, employees, and even strangers came to see what the program was about. Cameras flashed as the billionaire stepped onto the stage, but his speech was simple. "I once made a joke," he began, smiling lightly, "and I thought it meant nothing, but that joke reminded me that talent doesn't depend on status or job titles. Sometimes the greatest gifts are hidden in the quietest people. And today we celebrate one of those gifts." He turned toward the janitor, who stood beside the piano with nervous hands. The billionaire nodded, giving him silent encouragement. When the janitor sat down at the piano, the audience hushed instantly. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and let his fingers begin their journey across the keys. The music filled the room, warm and alive, touching every listener with a kind of softness that made them forget their worries. People leaned forward, mesmerized. Children stared wide-eyed. The billionaire stood at the side of the room, arms crossed lightly, feeling something close to pride. He wasn't proud in a business sense, but in a human sense. Proud that someone who once felt invisible was now shining in front of everyone. When the last note faded, the room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping and cheering, many with tears in their eyes. The janitor stood slowly, almost overwhelmed by the response. For years he believed his gift was forgotten. But in that moment, he knew it had simply been waiting for the right time to return. The billionaire walked up to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I think you've just changed more lives than you realize," he said. The janitor gave a soft smile. "You changed mine first." After the event ended, several parents approached him, asking if their children could join the classes. Young musicians came forward, eager to learn. Even some adults asked if they could start lessons after work. The janitor listened patiently, offering warm replies to everyone. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen. He felt needed. He felt alive. Weeks passed and the music program grew quickly. Students arrived every day, filling the building with laughter, practice sessions, and the sound of learning. The janitor, now the instructor, helped each student with a kindness that came from understanding struggle. He never judged mistakes. Instead, he encouraged them, telling them that every great musician starts at the beginning. The billionaire visited often, but not as a boss. He came as someone who enjoyed seeing the progress. Each time he watched the students play, he remembered how a simple moment in a lobby changed the direction of someone's life. And maybe his own life too. One evening, as the instructor cleaned up the practice room, he paused at the piano and touched the keys softly. Not to play a full song, but just to remind himself of the journey. He thought about the joke he overheard that day. "Play this and I'll marry you," and smiled. It was funny how those words, meant as nothing serious, led him toward everything he had lost and found again. He closed the lid of the piano gently, looked around the room filled with instruments ready for the next day, and felt something warm inside him. He realized that sometimes life gives second chances in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes you don't need to chase a dream. Sometimes it turns around and finds you when you least expect it. And with that thought, he switched off the lights, stepped outside, and walked home knowing that tomorrow would bring more music, more hope, and more lives touched. All because one ordinary man dared to sit down and play when no one thought he could.